In the heart of Manhattan, where skyscrapers kissed the clouds and luxury was a way of life, there stood an upscale restaurant known for its world-class food and celebrity guests. The place buzzed with energy every night, filled with people dressed in their finest clothes, laughing over expensive meals and sipping glasses of aged wine. It was Friday evening, and the air inside the restaurant felt electric. Tables were packed, waitstaff moved like dancers across the floor, and soft jazz music played in the background. At one corner table sat a woman who commanded attention without even trying. She was tall, with perfectly styled hair and diamonds sparkling on her fingers. Her name wasn't important. What mattered was how she carried herself. She had an air of superiority, as if everyone else in the room existed only to serve her needs. This woman loved being noticed, and tonight was no different. She scanned the dining area with sharp eyes, making mental notes about who wore what and who seemed out of place. Her gaze landed on a young waiter approaching her table. He was dressed neatly in his uniform, moving with quiet confidence. But something about him caught her eye, or rather, didn't fit into her idea of perfection. Maybe it was the color of his skin, or perhaps just the fact that he looked too ordinary compared to the polished crowd around them. Whatever it was, it made her smirk before he even reached her. When the waiter finally stopped at her table, pen and notepad ready, she leaned back in her chair and gave him a once-over. Then, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, she let out a laugh. "Oh, sweetie," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Are you really the best they could send? You don't exactly look like someone who belongs here." The comment hung in the air like smoke after a firecracker. People turned their heads, curious to see how this would play out. Some felt uncomfortable. Others exchanged knowing glances. The waiter, however, didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled politely and replied, "I'll do my best to make sure your experience is memorable, ma'am." His tone was calm, almost soothing, but there was a flicker of determination behind his words. What the rich woman didn't realize was that this moment would set off a chain of events she couldn't have predicted. To her, the waiter might have been just another faceless employee whose job was to cater to her whims. But to those who knew him, he was more than that. He worked hard, always went above and beyond for customers, and never let anyone's rudeness get under his skin. Tonight, though, things felt different. There was a tension in the air, a silent challenge brewing between the two of them. As the waiter walked away to fetch her order, the woman smirked again, clearly pleased with herself. Little did she know, her actions had already planted seeds of curiosity among the other diners. They watched closely, wondering what would happen next. Would the waiter lose his cool? Or would he handle the situation with the same grace he'd shown so far? Meanwhile, in the kitchen, the staff whispered about what had just unfolded. They admired the waiter's composure because dealing with difficult customers was part of the job, but this particular guest seemed determined to push boundaries. No one could blame him if he snapped back, yet somehow they doubted he would. That's just not who he was. Back at the table, the rich woman continued to act as if she owned the place. She ordered dish after dish, then changed her mind multiple times, each request delivered with a condescending remark. Every time the waiter returned, she found new ways to belittle him. Yet through it all, he remained unfazed. Each response was polite, each movement deliberate. If anything, his professionalism only seemed to frustrate her more. The longer the meal went on, the more the atmosphere shifted. What started as mild amusement from some diners turned into discomfort. Even the rich woman's own friends began exchanging uneasy glances. Something told them this wasn't going to end well, or maybe it would end in a way none of them expected, unbeknownst to everyone. The waiter was quietly planning his next move. He knew this woman wanted to provoke him, to make him crack under pressure. But instead of giving her the satisfaction, he decided to show her and everyone else in the room exactly what he was capable of. And when the time came, it would leave jaws dropping and hearts racing. For now, the scene played out like any other night at the restaurant, plates clinking, laughter echoing, and conversations flowing. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing, one that would change the course of the evening forever. The rich woman continued to test the waiter's patience as the evening wore on. With every new course, she found a fresh opportunity to make snide comments or change her order at the last minute. She'd ask for steak cooked medium rare, then send it back claiming it wasn't done right. She criticized the seasoning of her soup, saying it tasted too plain. And when dessert arrived, a beautifully plated chocolate soufflé, she barely glanced at it before wrinkling her nose. "Are you sure this is edible?" she asked with a smirk loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Her friends giggled nervously, clearly unsure whether they should join in or stay silent. The waiter simply nodded and assured her that if anything wasn't up to her liking, he'd be happy to fix it. His tone remained calm, but there was something about his demeanor that hinted at an inner strength, an unspoken confidence that made people take notice. Despite his polite responses, the tension in the room grew thicker with each passing moment. Other diners began shifting uncomfortably in their seats, pretending not to listen but secretly hanging on to every word. Some felt sympathy for the waiter. Others were just curious to see how far the rich woman would push him. Even the restaurant staff started whispering among themselves in the kitchen, wondering what might happen next. At one point, the rich woman leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and gave the waiter a pointed look. "Tell me," she said mockingly, "do you even know what half these dishes are? Or are you just good at carrying trays?" Her words hit like a slap, sharp and deliberate. For a split second, the waiter paused. It was such a small hesitation that most people probably wouldn't have noticed, but those who did saw something flicker in his expression. Not anger, exactly, but determination. He took a deep breath, met her gaze squarely, and replied, "Ma'am, I assure you I'm familiar with every dish we serve here, including this one. But if there's anything else you'd like explained, feel free to ask." His voice carried no trace of irritation, only quiet authority. Still, the comment lingered in the air, heavy and loaded. The rich woman raised an eyebrow, seemingly surprised by his composure. Most servers would have crumbled under such blatant disrespect, but this young man stood firm, refusing to let her get under his skin. As the meal dragged on, the waiter handled everything she threw at him with remarkable grace. When she complained about the temperature of her drink, he brought a fresh glass without skipping a beat. When she demanded substitutions for her side dishes, he jotted down her requests patiently. Each time, his professionalism never wavered. Not even when she rolled her eyes dramatically after he answered one of her questions. But while the waiter appeared unfazed on the surface, inside he could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him. Comments like hers weren't new to him. Over the years, he'd faced plenty of customers who judged him based on appearances rather than actions. Yet tonight felt different. Maybe it was the way her laughter echoed through the crowded room, drawing attention from all corners. Or maybe it was the pitying glances from other patrons who seemed torn between admiration for his restraint and discomfort over her behavior. Something stirred within him, a quiet resolve to prove himself. Not because he needed validation from her, but because he wanted to remind everyone present, including himself, that dignity and talent couldn't be diminished by someone else's cruelty. As the evening wore on, he began to consider doing something unexpected, something that would turn the tables entirely. By the time dessert came around, the atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted. Conversations at nearby tables had slowed, almost as though people were waiting for the next twist in this unfolding drama. Servers tiptoed past the rich woman's table, trying not to draw attention. Even the pianist, playing softly in the background, seemed to play quieter notes. Sensing the tension in the air, when the waiter returned to clear away the plates, he didn't rush off like usual. Instead, he stood there for a moment longer than necessary, looking directly at the rich woman. There was no challenge in his eyes, just a quiet certainty. Then, without saying a word, he disappeared into the kitchen. A few minutes later, he reappeared, holding something unusual, a small microphone borrowed from the restaurant's live musician. The sight of it immediately drew murmurs of curiosity from the crowd. Everyone turned to watch as he stepped into the center of the dining area, adjusting the mic slightly before addressing the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth and steady, cutting through the low hum of conversation. "Thank you for allowing me to serve you tonight. Before we conclude our evening, I'd like to share something special, a little performance I hope will bring joy to your dinner." For a brief moment, the room fell completely silent. No forks clinked against plates, no glasses clinked together. All eyes were fixed on him, including those of the rich woman, whose smug expression faltered for the first time that night. Whatever she'd been expecting, this wasn't it, and then, without further explanation, the waiter launched into song. What followed was nothing short of breathtaking, a soulful rendition of a classic tune that resonated deeply with everyone in the room. His voice was rich and powerful, filling the space with emotion and authenticity. Every note carried a story, every lyric painted a picture of resilience and hope. People sat frozen in their chairs, captivated by the raw talent pouring out of this man they'd previously dismissed as just a waiter. Tears welled up in some eyes, while others exchanged looks of awe. Even the chef peeked out from the kitchen doorway, nodding slowly in appreciation. As for the rich woman, she sat there stunned, unable to tear her gaze away. Her earlier smirk was gone, replaced by an expression of disbelief and perhaps regret. For the first time that night, she was utterly speechless. By the time the final note faded into silence, the entire restaurant erupted into applause. Strangers rose to their feet, clapping enthusiastically, cheering for a performance they hadn't anticipated but would never forget. The waiter bowed humbly, thanked them softly, and then quietly returned to his duties as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet, despite his modesty, the impact of what he'd done rippled through the room. The rich woman signaled for her check shortly afterward, her earlier bravado replaced by a quiet shame. And though she left without another word, her actions or lack thereof spoke volumes about the lesson she'd learned that night. In the end, what started as a display of arrogance became a moment of transformation for her, for the waiter, and for everyone lucky enough to witness it. The room was still buzzing with energy long after the waiter finished his song. People couldn't stop talking about what they'd just witnessed. Strangers turned to each other, sharing wide-eyed looks and shaking their heads in disbelief. Some were dabbing at their eyes with napkins, while others sat quietly, letting the moment sink in. It wasn't every day you saw something so unexpected and so deeply moving unfold right in front of you. The rich woman, who had spent most of the evening making snide remarks, now looked like a completely different person. Her usual air of confidence had vanished, replaced by an awkward silence. She fidgeted with her purse, avoiding eye contact with anyone around her. For someone who thrived on being the center of attention, this sudden shift must have been unsettling. The waiter's performance didn't just entertain the crowd. It exposed her behavior in a way that words never could. And deep down, she knew it. When the waiter returned to her table with the check, he did so without hesitation or resentment. He placed it gently on the table, along with a small bowl of mints, a gesture the restaurant often extended to its guests. Then, he stood there for a moment, waiting to see if she needed anything else. His posture was relaxed, but there was an undeniable strength in how he carried himself. For once, the rich woman struggled to find her voice. She glanced up at him, then quickly looked away, her cheeks flushed red. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she cleared her throat and spoke softly. That was incredible," she said, her tone uncharacteristically humble. I didn't mean to offend you earlier. I was wrong." Her apology hung in the air, raw and genuine. It wasn't polished or rehearsed, but it came from a place of sincerity. The waiter met her gaze steadily, not with anger or triumph, but with understanding. He gave her a faint smile and replied, "Thank you for acknowledging that, ma'am. We all have moments where we can grow. Tonight, I hope we've both learned something valuable." His response was simple, yet it carried immense weight. There was no bitterness in his voice, no attempt to rub salt in the wound. Instead, he chose kindness, a choice that left a lasting impression on everyone within earshot. Even the rich woman seemed taken aback by his grace. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, as though a heavy burden had been lifted off them. She reached into her wallet and pulled out more cash than the bill required, leaving behind a generous tip. Before standing up to leave, she scribbled something. on a piece of paper and handed it to him. It was a note written hastily but with clear intent. "You reminded me of what truly matters. Thank you." As she walked out of the restaurant, heads turned to watch her go. But this time, the stares weren't filled with judgment or curiosity, they were tinged with respect. The rich woman hadn't just paid for her meal, she'd paid for a lesson in humility. And though no one knew exactly what would happen next, it was clear that the experience had changed her in ways she might not fully understand yet. Meanwhile, the waiter went back to work, seamlessly picking up where he'd left off. He refilled glasses, delivered plates, and checked on other tables as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. To him, this was just another part of the job, serving people with care and professionalism, regardless of how they treated him. But tonight, his actions spoke louder than any words ever could. Word of the incident spread quickly among the staff. By the end of the night, nearly every server, chef, and host knew about the rich woman's rude comments and the waiter's stunning comeback. They gathered in the kitchen during a brief lull, eager to share their thoughts. One server joked that the performance should become a regular feature at the restaurant, while another admitted she'd teared up watching it. Even the head chef, a stern man not known for showing emotion, offered a rare nod of approval. "You handled that beautifully," he told the waiter when things quieted down. "Not many people could have kept their cool like you did," the waiter shrugged modestly. "It's just part of the job," he said with a grin. "Besides, sometimes you gotta remind folks who you really are." His words earned chuckles from the group, but there was truth in them too. In a world where appearances often mattered more than substance, the waiter had found a way to prove himself not through confrontation, but through artistry and poise. He didn't need to argue or retaliate. His talent and character spoke for themselves. By the time the restaurant closed for the night, the story had already started spreading beyond its walls. A few diners posted videos of the performance online, capturing snippets of the waiter's soulful singing. Within hours, the clips began gaining traction, racking up views and comments from people around the globe. Many praised his vocal abilities, while others highlighted his ability to rise above adversity with dignity. Messages poured in from strangers expressing admiration and gratitude, thanking him for reminding them of the power of resilience. The next morning, the waiter woke up feeling a mix of emotions. On one hand, he was proud of how he'd handled the situation at the restaurant. He hadn't let the rich woman's words get to him, and instead of reacting with anger, he'd chosen to show her and everyone else what he was truly capable of. But on the other hand, he couldn't help but wonder if anything would really change. Would people see him differently now? Or would they forget about last night as soon as something new captured their attention? As it turned out, that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. By breakfast, his phone was buzzing nonstop with notifications. Friends, family, and even coworkers were sending messages congratulating him. Some shared screenshots of social media posts where strangers were praising his performance. Others tagged him in videos that had already gone viral. At first, he thought it was all a bit overwhelming. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight like this. But as he scrolled through the comments, he started to feel something unexpected: hope. People weren't just talking about his singing, they were celebrating his strength and resilience. Countless messages highlighted how he'd turned a moment of cruelty into something beautiful. "You showed grace under pressure," one person wrote. "Exactly what the world needs more of," another added. These words meant more to him than any applause or likes ever could. For years, he'd worked hard to prove himself not just as a server, but as someone who deserved respect no matter where he came from or what he looked like. And now, finally, people were seeing him for who he truly was. Encouraged by the response, the waiter began thinking bigger. Singing had always been his passion, but life had gotten in the way. Between paying bills and working long hours at the restaurant, he'd put his dreams on hold. Now, however, things felt different. The support pouring in gave him the push he needed to take a leap of faith. That afternoon, he called a close friend who dabbled in music production and asked if they could meet up to talk about recording some tracks. "Are you serious?" his friend asked, clearly excited. "Of course I'm in. Let's make this happen." Over the next few weeks, the waiter juggled his shifts at the restaurant with late-night studio sessions. It wasn't easy. There were days when exhaustion threatened to pull him under, but every time he stepped behind the mic, he felt alive. He poured everything into his songs, his struggles, his triumphs, and the lessons he'd learned along the way. Each track told a story, not just about him, but about anyone who'd ever been underestimated or dismissed because of prejudice. Meanwhile, the rich woman found herself reflecting deeply on the events of that evening. She couldn't stop thinking about the waiter's performance or the uncomfortable truth it revealed about her own behavior. For years, she'd prided herself on being confident and outspoken. But now, she realized that sometimes confidence could cross the line into arrogance, and speaking your mind didn't excuse saying hurtful things. What had seemed like harmless teasing to her had clearly cut deeper than she intended. Determined to make amends, she decided to use her influence for good. She reached out to local organizations focused on equality and inclusion, offering to host fundraisers and awareness campaigns. At first, people were skeptical. After all, this was the same woman who often made headlines for controversial remarks. But she persisted, showing up at meetings, listening to feedback, and slowly earning trust. Over time, she became a vocal advocate for treating others with kindness and respect, often sharing the waiter's story during interviews. "I'll never forget that night," she told an audience at one event. "It taught me that we're all more than what meets the eye. Sometimes it takes someone brave enough to sing their truth to remind us of that." Her transformation didn't go unnoticed. Critics initially accused her of trying to clean up her image, but as her efforts continued, even the harshest skeptics softened. She may not have changed overnight, but she was taking steps toward becoming a better version of herself. And that was something worth acknowledging. Back at the restaurant, the staff noticed a shift too. Customers who recognized the waiter from the viral videos started requesting him specifically, eager to meet the man whose voice had moved them. Some brought gifts, a handwritten note, a small bouquet of flowers as tokens of gratitude. Others simply wanted to shake his hand and thank him for reminding them of the importance of dignity and grace. The waiter accepted these gestures graciously, always quick to point out that he was just doing his job. Even the head chef, who rarely handed out compliments, started treating him differently. One day, after a particularly busy lunch rush, he pulled the waiter aside. "Listen," he said gruffly, "you've earned this place's respect 10 times over. Keep doing what you're doing. It makes us all look good." The waiter smiled, knowing exactly what the chef meant. Respect wasn't given freely. It had to be earned, day after day, through actions rather than words. And while fame might fade, the impact of standing firm in your values would last forever. By the time his debut album was ready for release, the waiter had become a household name. His music resonated with listeners across generations, blending soulful melodies with heartfelt lyrics that spoke to universal experiences. Songs about overcoming adversity, finding beauty in hardship, and believing in yourself struck a chord with fans worldwide. Concert venues filled up quickly, and radio stations played his tracks on repeat. But despite his newfound success, the waiter stayed grounded. He continued working at the restaurant part-time, insisting that it kept him connected to the people who mattered most. To him, the real heroes weren't celebrities or influencers. It was the everyday folks who showed up, worked hard, and treated others with kindness, no matter what challenges they faced. And so, the ripple effect of that single night continued to spread. From the rich woman's journey towards self-awareness to the waiter's rise as a symbol of resilience, the story inspired countless others to reflect on their own lives. It reminded them that everyone has a song inside them waiting to be sung, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let the world hear it. Little did anyone know, though, that this was only the beginning. The waiter's story was far from over, and the changes it sparked would continue shaping hearts and minds for years to come. The waiter's journey didn't stop with the release of his debut album. If anything, it was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that touched lives far beyond what he could have imagined. His music became a beacon of hope for people from all walks of life, whether they were struggling with self-doubt, facing discrimination, or simply trying to find their place in the world, listeners found solace in his lyrics. They weren't just songs. They were stories that mirrored their own battles and triumphs. One day, after finishing a sold-out concert in Chicago, the waiter received an email that made him pause. It was from a young man who had grown up in a small town where opportunities were scarce and prejudice ran deep. The boy wrote about how he'd always loved singing, but never believed anyone would take him seriously because of where he came from. Then he stumbled upon one of the waiter's performances online. "Your voice reminded me that I don't need permission to dream," the boy wrote. "Thank you for showing me that my story matters too." Reading those words brought tears to the waiter's eyes. He remembered being that boy once young, unsure, and desperate for someone to tell him he wasn't invisible. That email became a turning point for him. From then on, he decided to use his platform not just to share his own story, but to amplify the voices of others like him. He started visiting schools, community centers, and youth programs, encouraging kids to believe in themselves and chase their dreams no matter how impossible they seemed. At one school, he met a girl who dreamed of becoming a scientist but felt discouraged by teachers who told her she wasn't smart enough. She shyly handed him a drawing of a rocket ship during his visit, explaining that she wanted to build one someday. "Don't let anyone tell you your dreams are too big," he told her gently, signing his autograph on the back of her picture. Sometimes the biggest ideas come from the smallest places. These interactions fueled his passion even more. He realized that success wasn't just about achieving personal goals, it was about lifting others up along the way. Every time he saw a spark of confidence in someone's eyes, every time he heard someone say, "I can do this," he felt like he was doing exactly what he was meant to do. Meanwhile, the rich woman continued her work as an advocate for equality. Though she still faced criticism from some quarters, she refused to let it deter her. Instead, she leaned into her mistakes, using them as teaching moments both for herself and for others. During interviews, she openly admitted that she hadn't always been kind or fair and that change didn't happen overnight. "Growth is messy," she often said. "But if we're willing to listen and learn, we can make things better." Her efforts eventually led to meaningful partnerships with organizations focused on education, job training, and mentorship programs for underprivileged communities. One initiative in particular stood out, a scholarship fund aimed at helping students pursue careers in fields traditionally dominated by privilege. When asked why she chose to focus on education, she smiled softly and said, "Because knowledge changes everything. It gives people the tools to rewrite their own stories." Though the waiter and the rich woman rarely crossed paths again, their connection remained strong through the shared memory of that transformative night. Occasionally, the waiter would receive updates from mutual friends about her advocacy work, and she, in turn, kept tabs on his rising career. Both had grown in ways neither could have predicted, and while their journeys looked different, they shared a common thread, the desire to create positive change. Years later, when the waiter was invited to perform at a major awards ceremony, he took a moment during his acceptance speech to acknowledge the challenges that had shaped him. Standing on stage under dazzling lights, he spoke directly to the audience. "There will be times when people try to define you based on what they see or think they see. Don't let them. Your worth isn't determined by their opinions. Sing your song anyway, whether it's loud or quiet, whether anyone listens or not, because somewhere someone needs to hear it." His words echoed through the auditorium, earning a standing ovation. Backstage afterward, reporters swarmed him with questions, but one question stood out. "What's next for you?" He thought for a moment before answering. "I want to keep telling stories, mine, yours. Everyone's. We all have lessons to share, and I believe those lessons can bring us closer together. So whatever comes next, I'll keep listening, learning, and singing." True to his word, the waiter expanded his reach beyond music. He launched a podcast where he interviewed everyday heroes teachers, nurses, activists, and artists who were making a difference in their communities. Each episode highlighted resilience, creativity, and the power of kindness. Listeners tuned in not just for entertainment but for inspiration. finding nuggets of wisdom they could apply to their own lives. As for the rich woman, her legacy grew alongside his. She became known not just as a philanthropist, but as someone unafraid to confront uncomfortable truths. Her speeches and writings challenged people to examine their biases and strive for empathy. "We're all human," she liked to say, "and humanity thrives when we choose compassion over judgment." In the end, the story of the waiter and the rich woman wasn't just theirs, it belonged to everyone who had witnessed it, shared it, or been inspired by it. It served as a reminder that moments of tension could lead to transformation, that grace could silence cruelty, and that talent combined with humility could move mountains. And so, years later, when strangers gathered around dinner tables or coffee shops, they still talked about that unforgettable night at the Manhattan restaurant. They remembered the rich woman's laugh, the waiter's courage, and the performance that changed everything. But most importantly, they remembered the lesson it taught them, that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to rise above, and, in doing so, we can inspire others to do the same. The waiter's final note lingered long after the last chord, faded, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. And though the curtain had fallen on that chapter of his life, the melody of his journey continued to play, touching hearts and changing lives one song at a time.